Podcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome to episode 5 of Navigating Turbulent Times, where our expert panel looks at the practicalities of workers returning to the workplace. Following the publication of the UK government's return to work guidance last week, many organisations are preparing their workplace for returning employees. But what are the areas our profession needs to consider before reopening the doors? From changing the office layout to accommodating social distancing and introducing new ways of working and meeting, to amending cleaning, maintenance, security and catering service delivery, and working with other functions to achieve these changes, there is a lot to talk about when planning the return to work. I'm Cathy Hayward, Chair of the IWFM's London region and also Chairman of Magenta Associates, the workplace communication experts. We're working with a number of organisations planning the comms around returning to work at the moment, and I'll be facilitating today's webinar. And we've got an expert panel here. To start with, Ravi Bhatnagar is Account Director at boutique facilities management provider Anabas. He's currently involved in supporting many of Anabas's clients in planning the return to workplace. Alison English is Deputy CEO of Leaseman, the world's leading measure of employee workplace experience. As a result of the pandemic, Leaseman has launched a home working survey to help organisations to understand how their dispersed workforce is being affected by working from home, and we'll hear more about the results of that later. Simone Fenton-Jarvis is Workplace Consultancy Director at Ricoh and has over 13 years experience in FM and workplace. She's a fellow of the Institute and Vice Chair of the Workplace Special Interest Group. And she's spending a lot of her time with organisations to plan that return to work. And finally, Raj Krishnamurthy is CEO of FreeSpace and an expert in workplace tech. In the past few weeks, the FreeSpace team has explored how sensors, digital signage and analytics can be put to use in creating a safe and healthy workplace and managing a controlled return to work. So that's our panel. I think you can ask questions as we go along. We will also have questions at the end, but if there's any burning issues, please do ask them as we go, and we can put them to our panel. Let's kick off with you, Simone. How should we be welcoming people back to work? I've seen numerous examples, pilot programs with about 10% of a building's normal capacity to kind of stress test systems. There's been staggered starts and finish times, increased shift patterns, split working between teams. What are the key ways from your perspective?
I don't think there's a one size that fits all. I think, you know, when organisations start looking at what their workplace can kind of occupy safely, obviously where the bottlenecks are generally in the reception areas, the lifts, the toilets, narrow corridors, staircases. I think when you take all that into consideration, I think key thing when we're introducing people back into the workplace is ask people how they feel about returning to the workplace. I think depending on location, if people are having to travel on trains and tubes to get to the workplace, then obviously, you know, that individual risk assessment will be higher than somebody that can walk to the office. So I think that element needs to be considered for that return. I think ultimately, if we can start capturing the information of who wants to come back to the office and why do they want to come back, we might start getting to the bottom of the question of what is the office for. And I think we've got a really good opportunity now to start answering that question. You know, there's a mix, I guess, of people that have really missed the office, and then there's people that are not too bothered and happy at home. I think that is being determined at the moment by the fact that there is people working at the dining room table. There are people who are in their own offices. There's people with kids around their ankles. And, you know, it's that kind of not one size fits all. And I think we need to start looking at people individually and then start, when we're phasing that return to work, especially if your occupancy is going to start at 20, 30%, we need to prioritise that. People that have been isolated for a number of weeks now, they would be, you know, quicker, they should be quicker to return to the office than the people that are quite having a nice time at home and not in too much of a rush. So I think it's just going back to that individual level and taking this right down to that people-centric approach.
Okay, but it seems quite likely that some element of home working is going to continue for some time yet, particularly if we do start going back at sort of 20 to 30%, and maybe actually continue into the long term. So, Alison, Leeseman's already started some research into this area. What have the results been so far, and what have been employees' experiences of working from home?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's really held up is tech. So we're seeing that people are pretty easily able to transition from office to the home environment, and the technology is held up. In many cases, when we compare the home working data to the office results, we're seeing actually that people's tech at home is performing better than they are in the office. So in terms of the return to work, I think that's a key area that the office world kind of needs to be aware of, that if everyone's experiencing good technology now, our expectations are going to be higher when we get back to the office. Productivity also, that's another area that's been, in my mind, surprisingly high, but I guess maybe that's, yeah, everyone's circumstances are different. We talked just before this started, obviously, with my 9-month-old, I'm not being terribly productive at home. But the data we're seeing shows that a lot of people are having an increased score in productivity when we look at our home working data compared to that office data. Some of the key areas that are where people are being more productive are around a lot of the individual routine tasks, phone calls, those kinds of things. Obviously, if you're at home in a limited group of people or a small group of people, or as someone was saying, lots of people are by themselves, it's a lot easier to conduct some of those one-on-one discussions, get some of that individual work done. No one's walking by and tapping you on the shoulder or interrupting you and those kinds of things. So we're seeing people performing better there. But where people are struggling is with some of that connectivity and some of those collaborations. So you don't overhear what the other team sitting next to you or other people in the room are talking about. You're not having lunch and kind of these informal chats that teams and businesses and companies and organizations used to have. And there were spaces around the workplace designed for those kind of chance encounters, where when we're all at our homes, we don't have the luxury of that. Everything it's forced, it's via email, it's did you pick up the phone? So we're missing a lot of that connectivity and again, those informal interactions that we know are so important to knowledge workers and innovation. And then the last part of that, I think that we've seen as suffering is work-life balance. There isn't a commute to say this is when my day starts, and at the end of your commute, that's when your day ends. You don't leave it at the office. If your office is in your living room or your dining space or one of your bedrooms, or if you're kind of moving your office throughout the day, and you don't have a specific place to work, it's hard to shut off once you've switched on, because emails are constantly coming in. People are online. It seems longer than they used to be. So we're seeing a struggle with that work-life balance there as well.
Yeah, I think a lot of us appreciate that your day can, I mean, Simone, before we came on the call, was saying that she was doing a sort of 7:30 call this morning, and then sometimes your day can stretch to 12 hours or more, although you might be taking breaks in between that. So it's a real challenge, isn't it, for people? Raj, moving on to you on the tech side of things. As Alison said there, technology has played an enormous role in helping us to work from home for the past few months, sometimes with very little notice. Video conferencing obviously replacing meetings, webinars replacing face-to-face events, collaboration tools like Slack and Basecamp really kind of coming into their own. What sort of technology are we going to see developed to support the return to work?
Sure, Kathy. I think the obvious kind of perception on technology is in terms of the communications technology, which has been kind of what has been tested really, in terms of when people went back home, they used their personal wireless, they used their personal devices, and it worked. So the expectation is quite high when you use technology. So when people come back into work, the expectation again would be that anything that is being deployed is going to support them to have a better day at work. So whatever businesses deploy in terms of using technology, it's a tough ask, because new technology is going to be developed for new applications, and it has to work because the expectation is very high. What we see beyond the usual communications technology, there are 4 broad areas for technology for day one, if you may, of starting work. I mean, there's going to be more coming in the future, but day one, if you look at it, there are 4 areas, and those are to start with social distancing. How can technology help with not only designing your social distance floor plan, but also use technology to communicate that to people, to not so much enforce, but to help you catch those exceptions so that you can kind of gently tell people, to kind of follow the set guidelines for everybody's comfort. So social distancing is a big place where technology can help. The second big area is occupancy-based cleaning, as we call it, because cleaning costs are going to be enormous coming back in. There's a heightened expectation of hygiene. If you can use your occupancy knowledge to drive cleaning, it could give some significant benefits for organizations to focus that clean so that you can get a higher standard of clean with the same resource, possibly.
Are you saying sort of seeing where people are and cleaning those spaces more than areas
to a higher standard? To a higher standard, exactly. So because if you think about it, if spaces are going to be occupied 10%, 15% for a few months, the expectation and also the visual presence of cleaning is going to become very important. The daytime cleaning aspect is going to be more important. So it's about the assurance as well. And that also goes on, how do you use technology for employee reassurance? So communication using digital signage, which is far more effective than the posters and so on and so forth. So how can you use digital signage to increase that reassurance that employees are looking for? And last but not least is the compliance and planning, because again, 10% occupancy is going to go to 15%, which is going to go to 20%, and hopefully 30% by the end of the year. That's what we are hearing from most of our clients. But when does it go from 10 to 15%? When does it go to 20%? When does it go to 30%? So knowing that is going to be very useful for the planning purposes and helping you decide if you want to open up more floors. So manage your space accordingly. So I think day one, if those 4 items are in place, I think and working, that'll be a good thing for companies to aspire for in terms of technology.
Okay, no, that's really interesting. And in your view, do companies have some of this technology already, or is this a lot? I mean, clearly digital signage, a lot of organisations will have that in place. But are we sometimes talking about new tools that they're going to have to embrace?
Yeah, I think there are a number of our customers, for example, have the occupancy solutions that we have been putting out there for the last 4 years. So there are companies which have occupancy solutions that they can embrace. They have to repurpose it. Social distancing is something that will be regional, will be national. So there has to be that flexibility that I know the many suppliers are coming out with solutions to help with social distancing. But I'll say one thing, that whatever companies do, they need to make it friendly for the employees. There is some ways of presenting any message that you want to present. There's a friendly way of presenting it. There's an unfriendly way of presenting it. And there's already a lot of anxiety. And, it's okay to over-egg a little bit in terms of what you're doing. And it's also important to communicate to the staff that it might be that your perception that we are over-egging it, but we are doing it, at a higher standard for everybody else. So that, and it's for you to appreciate that is happening. So I think there has to be some human-centric consideration in the design of how you go about deploying both technology and non-technology solutions in the workplace, and that's going to be quite important in the early days. The feedback from the first employees that come in is going to make others that are slightly more nervous to decide whether they're coming in or not. So it has to be friendly at the outset.
Absolutely. We've had a question come in actually on that point, which it might be good to address now. So it's from Sophie Faulkner, who's asking, is there any advice for large organisations managing a people-centric approach when they have over 5,000 staff? So quite a considerable number. I think the panel got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, sure. So I think collecting that almost, dare I say, temperature check of the organisation right now, and drive that people-centric approach by what people are asking and saying. So almost back to my leisure centre days of, you asked for this and we did this. And I think that element of the technology that is in the workplace, it does have to be people friendly. And I think for an organisation of 5,000 people, it might be, you know, they might have higher budgets, for instance. It might be then that you start looking at, you know, technologies that smaller organisations just wouldn't even dream of. But actually just remember that when we're doing the technology and that return to work, that, you know, we manage buildings for people in them. So actually, how does that technology make that person feel safe? Because we can control the environment and we can make it safe. But when people start coming in, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to feel safe. So I think all the technologies that are going to be in use, such as, you know, the perspex screens and the hazard tape that we've already seen, that's not going to signal to people's brain that that's a safe place to be. So actually, how can we use technology in a better way to really have that controlled element of the environment, make you feel unsafe? And I think that's what the larger organisations need to be thinking about, and that's, it's what something that we're working on day in, day out with people, because ultimately, you know, otherwise people will start thinking, I'm going to stay at home. And you know, I think it's about getting a balance back again.
Absolutely. Ravi, moving on to you, I know you're working with a lot of your clients on this, and it's a bit of a big question, but from what you've done so far, what changes are organisations going to have to make to their facility services, so their cleaning, security, catering and maintenance operations, to prepare a building for reoccupation, and as Simone said there, to help reassure people that it's safe once they're there?
Yeah, so there's a lot of work that needs to be done. I think the team, my teams anyway, have been thinking that it was going to be quiet, and they're busier than they've ever been getting the building ready, you know, measuring for social distance, looking at how we bring visitors into the building, you know, where the touch points are, trying to eliminate as many touch points as possible, reviewing risk assessments to make sure that everything that we're doing is taking into consideration social distancing and reducing that risk. We're looking at communications plans, because I think one of the key things, even for those teams, the cleaning team, the reception team, is making them feel comfortable that they can come back and it's going to be safe for them. Touching on the point about making it a welcoming environment and making sure that guest experience is still carried out for people coming into the building, and it's not a scary environment to come back into, because you're used to coming into a building that's kind of open and you can go where you want, and now there's going to be lines and you have to follow social distancing, and it's going to be very different. And some of the feedback we've already had when people show up at the building, they're like, oh yeah, I imagined this, but this isn't what I was expecting. So getting that information to people so that they can see it is important.
And we've had a number of questions coming already, which is great. So please do keep them coming. This perhaps goes back to the point that Simone was talking about earlier. How do we manage staff who are being disabled almost by their coronavirus-induced anxiety? So people who are really, really worried about the return to work and presumably don't have any underlying health symptoms, so they've got no sort of necessary physical reason to be worried, but they are being disabled by that anxiety. How do we go about counteracting that and supporting those people?
I think that ultimately we shouldn't be pressurising them back to the workplace. I think this is where you'll see a rise of, you know, the occupational health kind of employee assistance programs, where we start giving people somebody that they can talk to about this fear, because, you know, we've seen a rise of conversations around people that may have OCD and how they're now coping with the pandemic is very different towards somebody that hasn't got OCD. And I think this kind of, just because you've not had COVID doesn't mean that you're not going to be affected by it mentally. And I think looking at all the research out in the other countries, there is a massive rise of mental health issues that have come out of the back of this. So I think we be compassionate when we're starting doing these return to work strategies, and ultimately, you know, asking that simple question of, do you feel safe returning to work? And back to Ravi's point, I think, how do we prepare people for what they're going to see when they turn up at the workplace? I advised somebody the other day saying, why don't you as FM, you know, take a little video of your workplace and what that workplace now is, and do little this is the hand sanitizer station, this is a digital signage, look out for here when the cleaner's next here, this is the desk booking system that we've put and the visit management system, and do a little video and send it to all your colleagues, because then they're not going to turn up to some environment that they've not seen before, because it is going to feel very differently.
Yeah, I think that video, that sort of walkthrough video, is really nice if organisations can afford to do that. That provides a lot of reassurance, doesn't it? Certainly when we've been talking about on the comms aspects, I think it's a big piece about communicating before people go back to work, and obviously once they're there. But that reassurance piece is so important. And another question's come in about how best to manage the welfare and also protect employees coming to the office regarding anyone experiencing COVID symptoms, and how to manage that contact tracing. Anyone got any? I know the government is looking at bringing contact tracing from the beginning of next month, but has anyone got any experience of how they're going to manage that in the workplace?
Have, if you want me to go again.
Yeah, go
Don't want to hog hog the time. So we've got a desk booking system that means that not only can HR or anybody in senior in the organisation can determine who comes back to the workplace. So it could be on the basic, the principle of that job can't be done remotely. We need that person in the workplace, therefore we need to give them a desk. So you can allocate the desks on that point. It will also, if you book a desk 9 till 12 and then you come away from that desk, somebody else won't be able to then use it again until it's sanitised. And then the next point of that is, because you know who's been in the workplace, if someone does then get the symptoms, you can say, right, these 60 people were in the workplace that day, and then you can make that communication to them to say, you may have been at risk of transmission, therefore please self-isolate for the next 7 and 14 days, whatever the guidance now currently says. And I think that kind of showing that you have been almost not tracking who's in the office, because people may take that to the extreme thought, but maybe it's that we're doing this to look after you and make sure that you are aware of who you have come into contact with, because the government track and trace kind of app, I don't believe it will work indoors, just for that simple thing of how many workplaces have you been in that actually you lose signal, and how many Bluetooth devices are in a workplace that are already competing with your phone from Bluetooth connected, things like sensors. We do have to be careful around that, and we can't just rely on one.
Raj, it seems to me that tech has a massive role then to play in that, from what Simone's talking about there in terms of that contact tracing.
Yeah, I think, Kathy, the contact tracing at a broader level, I think governments will make it work one way or the other with some success. So that is, some of the capabilities that is being released by companies, Google and Apple are really for public authorities to be successful with it. So I think, let's give them a chance for success, right? So that will happen. But at the workplace, I agree with Simone that technology can help. I think it's key to make sure that people don't feel that they're being kind of chased on with solutions. It's important that people are allowed to kind of use the space in a way that they feel most comfortable with. But of course, when there's an issue, make sure that you're taking duty of care to support them. We do have a similar approach with the desk allocation method, where you get allocated a desk. Again, occupancy-based cleaning means that if you've occupied a space, it doesn't get released before it's cleaned, so you can check. We have a system also which allows you to check if the space has been used after it's been cleaned. So give that assurance that, yeah, it's been cleaned, and after that nobody has used it, and you can use it. And when you use it, it is logged against the system that this person has used it. But you don't need to actually chase up on that until you need to do that in case of an infection. So there are ways of going about doing it without having to kind of force people to book stuff. But anyway, these are different approaches to take really to achieve the same end goal. But the key thing again is to make people feel comfortable, kind of not deviate too much from the older practices that people are comfortable with using spaces. But yeah, I agree with that. Yeah.
Ravi, from your side, something that we've talked a bit about in the past is about policing these systems. There's a sort of idea, we can set all this up, we can create, socially distanced workplaces and do everything that we can do, but, people will do what they want once they get into them. And I've heard different people's views on how their own workplaces are going to do it. Some people saying, right, we're going to set it up, and then it's kind of up to people what they do. We're not going to police it, and we're going to hope that social pressure will mean that people will distance. And I've heard the other side, they're hiring extra security guards to literally patrol the building and make sure that people are social distancing. What's your kind of experience in this area? What are some of Annabas's clients doing?
Yeah. So I think that kind of goes back to what we're saying about making people feel welcome and making them feel safe in the office. And I think by having a policing type approach is never going to work. I mean, we have to rely on people to be aware of the environment, be aware of what they're doing. So it's a case of educating, having signage there to remind people of what's happening. I don't think the policing approach would necessarily work. I think it would just create more anxiety, and you would be dealing with more difficulty in the workspace, I think.
Okay, there's on similar lines. I've had a question from Louise Squires, talking a little bit about what authority organisations have to limit their social life or to inform employers if they've gone to hospital or anywhere with a sort of higher risk of contracting the virus. What does the panel think there? How far are we going to kind of dig into people's lives and control things?
I think it's difficult to do that, Kathy, honestly, because I think what is going to make you a potential risk in the workplace? You could be a passive carrier, so you can't really say where you draw the line. And so I don't think that it's going to work to try to get into people's personal lives to say that, I think self-declaration, if you know that you're ill, self-declaration would be the safest, bet that you can place, that people will take responsibility and they will isolate themselves if they're not feeling well. I think part of this could be, almost like a subtle daily check that you ask people, in some form, saying that before they come to work, are they feeling good today before they are, embarking on the journey to come into work? That could be a simple check to see, people make that conscious choice of not coming to work if they're not feeling well, or even during the workday, if they're not feeling well, they should be given that flexibility and freedom to call it off and go home. So, but I don't think beyond that it's going to help. One thing I want to comment is on this policing aspect. I think it's not policing is not going to work, forcing is not going to work, but knowing is important. If you know, for example, that are many social violations taking place, social distancing violations taking place on the workplace, that is a useful information to have. So you could possibly use nudge, you could possibly use suggestions, some kind of visual or even discrete targeted communications to get people to kind of change their behavior. You don't have to kind of take a stick and wave around, basically. You have other ways of doing it.
Absolutely. Alison, from your side, obviously you've had at least my research currently is looking at home working, but you've had an enormous experience over the last 10 years or so researching people's experiences of the workplace. How do you think that their attitude towards workplace is going to change kind of post-COVID?
Yeah, quickly to touch on the previous one, I think one of the anxieties we're hearing from a lot of clients is not actually about the workplace, because you can set that up to be physically distanced, but a lot of that's around that journey to work, especially in metropolitan areas and taking public transportation. So I think part of the challenge with asking, and trying to police people outside of the workplace is them not even knowing when they possibly could have been exposed as things start to open up. So it's all well and good to have things around the workplace that are set to physical distancing, but yeah, there's so many challenges on the outside of that that we can't control that.
That's really interesting. We've had an absolute ton of questions come in, so I was going to see if we can work through some of these. One of them about space planning said the majority of office workspaces are designed to maximise occupancy. How difficult will it be for organisations to change this mindset to facilitate social distance in the workplace in terms of physical desk space? I've seen lots of videos showing how this is going to be done, taking out individual chairs and things like that. But Ravi, do you want to sort of kick us off? I know you've done some work on this with some of your clients.
Yeah, so it is all about going back to your desk planning and how you've set the office up and how you can, you know, where do you need barriers because you can't actually get the physical space that's required, and all that planning leads to letting you know how many people you can safely bring back to the office as well. And then you've got to think about, so what do you do with all the extra chairs? How do you discourage people from sitting at these desks? So it's back to nudging people in the right direction and a whole behavioral change in the office. I mean, even going to coffee points and tea points, you've got to control the space there as well. So I think it all goes back to getting that behavioral change that's going to be required to be in the new office space.
It's going to be very strange, isn't it? Sorry, carry on.
I'm going to say, I think that's where like things like the desk booking is relevant, because I think if you can look at the occupancy of the workplace and you've got a dashboard that says the workplace can be up to 30%, and that dashboard is integrated into the desk booking, that it means that only 30% of the desks are bookable, and it maintains a social distance in between the desks, you then can keep the workplace looking as normal as possible without the tape and moving chairs by simply releasing more desks to be booked. And I think it's that element of, can we keep on the, you know, if we go into all the transactional analysis stuff, can we stay on adult to adult? You know, we don't want to be telling people, you can't sit there, you can't sit there. How are you feeling today? If you've got a sniffle, you can't come in the office. We're adults. And despite what was happening on Southend Beach yesterday, we should be trusted. And I think that's where the things in the workplace and the technologies need to be there as a bit of an enabler, not there as policing. I think by saying, look, we've got occupancy sensors, there's a heat map on a wayfinding system at the beginning of the workplace. This is the desk that you booked because the visit management system flashes up when you sign in. This is almost the utopia of what the office could look like if, as FM, we'd started embracing technology a few years earlier, like we probably should have done. And I think this is now the time where we really need to, you know, kickstart things.
So, I mean, we're potentially looking at really changing the way we're working. I mean, there's a question come in saying we've moved over the last 20 years towards a collaborative shared space, meeting areas, community space within offices. Does the panel see a move towards other ways of working and space usage? So perhaps more moving away from hot desks to more dedicated desks again?
I think, Kathy, we have a point here. I think we've just mobilizing a client that wants to go live on June 1st, 25,000 employees across the UK. They went to exactly this, where there was flexible working, and they're going to stay with flexible working. They're not going to go back to desk booking because it never worked for them. But there are several ways of handling that without, you know, with the technology that's in there. So there are, you know, I would just put on the table, there's no wrong way of doing things, but there's, you know, you can use the technology to achieve whatever you want as your philosophy is in the way you want to do it. But hot desking is a very, very misused word. So I want to be very careful what that means exactly. If you're talking about the same desk that is being used by different people during the day, that's a no-no already, right? You can't have that. You have to have it hygienically kind of treated before the next person uses it. But flexible working is different to hot desking. I mean, you can have one desk during one day and you can have it for the whole day. You can possibly even have it for the whole week if it's your week to come in. But then that desk can be used by somebody else the next week. So that is flexible as far as I'm concerned. So there is a whole spectrum of how you can use your space. So we should not jump into and fall into the trap that the media has laid for us in terms of jumping into terminology. So you can achieve whatever you want with technology. It's your philosophy at the end of the day that you want to drive in your business.
But whose responsibility, this is another question that's come in from SB Banks Mar, whose responsibility is it to implement the things that we're learning from the data that we're seeing at the moment? Obviously, this has been a question we've been discussing for years, I guess, but who does it sit with? Is it HR? As it impacts on people's safety? Is it FM because it needs to combine lots of elements and subcontractors and services? Is it corporate real estate because it might impact on the property footprint? And it's to do with the environment. Who, or maybe it's a bit of everything.
I think it's a bit of everybody. Who's looking at employee experience, absolutely. All of those groups play a key role in that overall experience and in how the occupiers of the workplace are using that workplace. So without buy-in and without collaboration within that group, it's not going to be a successful rollout for sure.
I guess this perhaps goes because, Simone, I know one of your previous jobs was as a chief workplace officer, and perhaps this is a time when a chief workplace officer could really get to grips with a lot of this and manage all these different interrelationships.
Yeah, it's like you just read my mind, because I was about to say, if only everybody had a chief workplace officer by now. And I think that is that, you know, that element, because having the oversight of the property, the facilities management, the IT, the HR, the well-being of people, you know, in that role, I had a really good insight into that temperature of the organisation and what was needing to come. And I think that element of taking the feelings of people and operationalising, if that's even a word, that kind of that feeling into the actual day-to-day, making it into the practical, you know, working way, that's going to be something that a chief workplace officer is in a perfect position to do.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's a shame we probably don't have more of them. We've got a number of questions focusing around the kind of policing issues. So people asking, what do they do if they find themselves in a less than 2 metre situation? My teenage son works for Wix, and they have they wear fluorescent jackets which say "back off" on the back of them, which I think is probably a quite nice message. But is there ways that you can kind of politely, I guess, get people to move away if you are, as an individual in the workplace, and someone's standing a bit too close?
I think you have a choice to move away.
Yeah.
I think, I mean, there's a very important article that was published by CDC. I mentioned to the other colleagues before, just about a couple of weeks ago now. It was a study done in South Korea about a call center, and it talked about the infection in the call center. It was across 3 floors, but the infection actually stayed within half of 1 floor, even though the people were moving about quite a bit between the 3 floors. And it was a multi-storied building, and they went to the cafe downstairs. And that's interesting, because what that study then went on to say is that it's not so much the time you spend passing each other, it's the time you actually spend in close proximity for an extended period of time. So the time that you spend as well does matter. So, if you find yourself for a short while near people, then you have a choice to move away. You should move away. But it is when you sit down for an extended period of time, that's where everything matters. How close people are, how ill they are, what the air circulation is at that time. All that is going to be far more important than when you're just passing by or filling up coffee or whatever. That doesn't matter as much. At least that's what the study seems to say. Early days, I guess.
Absolutely. And Ravi, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think it's important to make people feel comfortable that if they are feeling uncomfortable about how somebody is, that it's okay for them to step away, and it's not, they're not making a scene or causing problems. So it's making sure that you're developing that culture where people can step away comfortably.
Absolutely. And what's the panel's thoughts on thermal imaging cameras? Perhaps this might be one for you, Ravi. We've seen a lot of security companies introducing thermal imaging cameras into reception areas, with the idea that people's temperatures will automatically be taken as they enter a building, or the security officer will take their temperature with a handheld camera. Is that another level of assurance, or is it going to increase anxiety, Ravi? What do you think?
So personally, from my opinion, I think it's just going to increase anxiety, and there's all kinds of issues surrounding them in terms of, how accurate are they? What if people are asymptomatic? It's a very difficult subject. I mean, they're still debating on whether or not to put them into airports. I really don't know what the best answer is for that.
Absolutely. And what about another question what about the view of wearing masks in the office? I know that some organisations have been bulk buying PPE, again, to reassure colleagues if they do want to wear it, it's available for them to wear. But Simone, perhaps what's been your experience so far in terms of wearing masks?
Yeah, I just think that, again, if people are wearing masks, if they come back to the office too soon, can we not manage it in other ways? Because do you want to sit in an office looking like you're in basically sat in a hospital? And apart from the NHS has specifically asked us not to bulk buy PPE because the NHS. So I think it is important that we remain, respectful of that request, and take other measures to look after our people. I mean, on the thermal imaging cameras, us as an organisation have kind of gone full circle with all of this. We've got cameras on tripods that are going into organisations. We've then got thermal imaging cameras that are actually built into visit management systems. But it's important you get the right camera. You can get a thermal imaging camera for probably £100 off Amazon, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's going to be accurate. The ones that you need are the ISO accredited ones that they take the temperature from the tear duct. That is the most accurate measure of the body temperature, because otherwise you will get into situations of people that have just ran to a meeting, or they might be menopausal. They will be picked up on the system, and I think we really need to be careful before putting thermal imaging cameras out there, and make sure we are in there for the right reason and keeping it in the most people-centric way as possible.
There's a big question here about data privacy as well, isn't there? I mean, can you imagine a situation that you have got a higher temperature for whatever reason? It may be COVID related, it may be not, and you're sort of dragged away by a security officer. That's the last thing that we want in workplaces.
Definitely not.
Alison, we got a question here which goes back to what you were talking about in terms of using public transport. So with the likelihood that more people will be cycling, running to work, what strategies are the panel using to manage aspects such as showers, change rooms, facilities and storage, bikes and clothes, drying, and another question also focused on social distancing in washrooms. So we're going to put quite a lot of pressure on that particular aspect of a building. How are we going to cope with that?
No, and I think having people use cycling or those more active ways to get to work make that the temperature checks, as we were saying, an even bigger challenge. If you show up and you've just gotten off your bike, you might need 20 minutes to cool down before your temperature is normal, before you could even go in to take a shower. So I think logistically that adds complications. I mean, we know from our office data that kind of the conditions of toilets, it's one of the super drivers, and we know it's really important to people in the building. So I think for Ravi and teams like that, it's going to be ultra important for people to feel like the washrooms that they've been cleansed and sanitized and on a regular basis. Much more so now because you're touching door handles, getting in and out. There are a lot of challenges and concerns around that we know from our office data that are, I guess, big pressure points for employees. And managing them in those tight spaces. So that is going to be a challenge back to the workplace and understanding how employees can still use those spaces but maintain physical distance and feel like they're in a safe and clean environment.
Absolutely. I think it's I guess the key here is that the organisation's responsibility doesn't just start at the door of the building. We've got to help employees to plan their route to work, and if they don't have any other option but public transport, they live very far away, then perhaps they do continue home working. Or we encourage people to cycle or whatever it is, but we can't just expect our responsibility to end at the office door.
Well, that's one of the things a lot of clients are using the home working data and our home working survey for, is to understand what is the current home situation like, and who are those teams and those employees who are desperate to get back to the workplace, who's going to benefit most. So if you can only have 10 to 15 to 20% occupancy, rotating one day a week for everybody maybe doesn't make sense. Maybe there are particular people, Simone, as you were saying, who are really struggling with 9-10 weeks now of home working, that collecting that data and understanding who those groups are will help get those people back to the workplace, the people who are going to benefit the most from it.
We've had a number of questions around maintenance, which I'd like to put to Ravi, if I may. One around aircon. Is aircon use in the office, especially in multi-floor premises? Is there any study or advice on the subject of viral spread through the system? I know we've talked about that issue before.
Yeah, so that's one of the areas that I've been looking into, and currently the government advice is to get as much fresh air into the environment as possible. So whether or not the droplets can make it into an air conditioner and be spread around the building is not proven one way or the other. The advice coming out is to open up fresh air and keep as much fresh air in the system as possible.
And is anyone aware of transmission via HVAC systems?
There was a
There
case.
is again another. Yeah, sorry, go on, Simon. I think you're referring to the same one that I saw as well.
Yeah, no, go for it. It's all right, I've talked enough.
No, there was a study done in a restaurant which showed people sitting in the line of a duct that seemed to all get affected, but few and far between in terms of data points. But it's understandable that it's an airborne disease, so there's a likelihood that aircon will have a significant role to play.
Absolutely. And someone's asked a question about having all, there's perhaps an aspiration that people have already got a lot of this technology in the building, and how likely it is that companies are going to be able to afford to invest in not just new technology, but new systems and processes. What does the panel think about putting together perhaps a business case for some of this?
I think what's the cost of not doing it is the key question here. I think that how can you put a return on investment on a human life? And I think that is the crux of this. I don't want people to do knee-jerk reactions of let's go and spend hundreds of thousands of pounds on systems that we might only need for 3 months. I think this is where we need to look at the technology and how that technology can drive into the future, not just because of COVID. I was working with one organisation that was going to spend £100,000 on Perspex screens. When I told them the technology that they could actually use, the technology it was £32,000. So I said, you're going to save a lot of money, and also this technology takes you into the future. This technology isn't going to be floating around in the sea in 6 months' time when you don't need it anymore. And I think that we need to be conscious of the decisions that we're now making, and ask why we're making them.
Absolutely. I think Raj, something that we talked about before was, after 9/11, people said they'd never work in skyscrapers again, but people kind of got used to that risk, didn't they? And they've learned to accept it. Do you think there's a sense that we could get used to that risk of COVID in the workplace, or do you think the workplace landscape will kind of permanently alter?
I mean, change was coming, and change will come faster. I think that's one thing for sure. But there will obviously come to some level of normalcy at some point of time, very similar to the 9/11. Like one of my customers said, never try to predict the future during a lockdown, because people are making all kinds of jumps into all kinds of assumptions. But I think from this question of expenditure, there will be an immediate expenditure for non-technology reasons that we will have to incur for safety purposes. So I was talking to an exec in New York the other day who said that their cleaning expenditure is going to grow tenfold, and that they know coming in immediately. But then the next level of thinking has to be where technology can help you to contain that cost, but still achieve better outcomes probably than you would achieve by simply throwing money at it. So there is that. But as far as the speed of change, it's going to depend on how people perceive, how people are comfortable, and how businesses appreciate the value of people collaborating. I think some businesses that are creative, that want people around, will really appreciate and embrace that change and find a way to bring people around, because that's what makes them tick, right? So, but many others will be happy that people are working from home. They've already announced that until the end of the year you can work from home. So the likes of Facebook and Google are saying that. So it's going to change for sure, and it's going to change faster.
And there's an interesting question here about the legal implications relating to personal data and things like confidential medical information and testing staff and virus tracking and tracing. How do we address that? And what are the kind of the key issues here, Raj?
I think it's ever so important that all that the thing will become more kind of people will become more conscious, and the people that were vocal before are going to be more vocal, rightly so. I think privacy has to be paramount. That's the way our societies are built up. We are not going to go into the the way societies in some of the society in the Far East are, where they would simply take that data and assume that it belongs to the businesses. That's not going to be the case. So we have to maintain that there is a lot of work that has already been done to provide a lot of services, provide a lot of assurance, and provide a lot of information to employees without infringing on their privacy. That's already exists. One needs to just explore that and work harder on bringing that to deployment. You don't need to know who is there in order to provide them a best environment to work in. You treat them, if they are there, then they should be given that environment to work in, and that's already there, really.
They're just all anonymous data, really.
Yeah, absolutely. You can do a lot with anonymous data. You don't need personalized information at all.
And Ravi, one for you, we've had a number of people asking about dealing with emergency situations. I know this is something that we've talked about in terms of fire evacuations, for example. How can you do a socially distanced fire evacuation? So do you want to talk a little bit about perhaps how to manage emergency situations with COVID in mind?
Yes, I think that goes back to your risk assessments. You need to analyze the risk in how to keep people safe. So if it's a fire emergency, you're not going to focus on social distancing. You're going to focus on getting people out of the building. But then when you get to your fire assembly point, you're going to want to make sure you've reviewed that and that you can resume your social distancing at the fire assembly point. And that'll be the same for your first aiders. You need to look at the risks that are going to be involved there. What PPE are you going to provide for them? Because it's a new risk and it's now being identified, so we have to take it into consideration in all those emergencies.
Absolutely. A question here about the statutory requirements for reopening offices. Obviously, the government released guidelines, but and there's a lot of best practice out there. A lot of organisations have published return to work guides. How much of this is a legal requirement of the employer?
Is the legal requirement. I think the Health and Safety at Work Act says that we must provide a workplace that is safe for people to be in. And I guess that's when things like the hierarchy of control comes in, because PPE should be the last item on there. We should be looking at the top end of the pyramid first. So I think it is a legal requirement. Organisations have not got an option on this.
Absolutely. I mean, someone's come here and said, if you say staff have to follow certain procedures and don't police it, then an organisation could be open to prosecution if someone caught COVID in the office. And of course, it's quite difficult to prove that they caught it in the office. So it is a legal requirement, is what I guess we're saying here. In the last 5 minutes or so, we've had quite a few questions about the overall impact on the workplace. What is the workplace of the future? And we've often talked about this as an issue, obviously, in the past. But how does the panel feel that the workplace of the future is going to change as a result of this? Are we going to look at the workplace in a different light? Let's start with Alison.
Sorry. I was just going to say, I think the workplace is always changing. While this is accelerating a change, and causing us to look at different facets, different aspects of the workplace, and how focusing now a lot more on employee health and safety and how they're feeling about that. It's another part of that workplace cycle. So how long it lasts, what the tail is for physical distancing, until there's a vaccine. Obviously, none of us know that. So there will certainly be changes now, but there'll be changes in 6 months. They'll just be different changes. So.
Simone?
Yeah, I think the workplace is always changing, or it should be, should I say. And I think that element of, what does the future workplace look like? It's a question that we always get asked, and nobody's got a crystal ball. I think I guess is what I'd like to think, is that the workplace becomes a destination that people want to go to, not a place where they have to go to. And I think that is more around the culture change and the trust levels that have increased in organisations. Because generally, home working was all about trust levels and IT infrastructure. Well, hopefully, we've kind of resolved some of that over the last kind of 12 weeks. And going into the future, we may hopefully give people a little bit more flexibility.
Ravi, what's your view on the future of the workplace?
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think it's going to change. I mean, just the example of the risk assessment I gave you, while the procedure is the same, the outcomes that come out of that risk assessment will be different and will change the way we work.
And Raj, finally, your perspective from the tech angle.
Yeah, tech as well as one other thing, Kathy, I'd like to bring up is that when you see that over a period of time, only about 30 to 40% of people are coming to work, CFOs and CRE directors are going to be sitting around the table scratching their heads. What are they going to do with their property? Because that's a huge, I mean, you know, I'm not saying the rubbing hands in glee or anything, but there is a huge question for businesses to ask what they're supposed to be doing with all that excess property that's out there. So there is a lot of nervousness around there, and that in whichever side of the equation people are. But that is a big decision. But tech obviously will play a massive role in enabling people, and as it always should. It should be behind the scenes. It should be invisible. It should allow you to do your job and be the best you can. So that's what it will continue to do, I think. So in workplace, at home, you know, in transit. So
I guess on that point as well, is that, I mean, the average kind of occupancy of the sensors that we've deployed is 47%. So when corporate real estate was kind of going, you need to double your space, well, they've already got that space to use because ultimately offices are underoccupied. So I think it's, again, don't make knee-jerk decisions now about how much space you may need in the future. Let this kind of settle down, look to see how people are using your space, because even if you're socially distanced, you're probably still going to have plenty of room left. So even, if we're now saying that 30% of the workplace are now going back to the workplace, then that is 30% of 47%, not 30% of 100%, I think is what we need to get our heads around.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And as we come up to the last couple of minutes, just want to thank you all, panel, for your time. Thank you to everyone who've attended. I think we've had record numbers of people. I think we had almost 600 people on the webinar during the session. So thank you all very much for your contributions. I'm sorry we didn't get to answer every question. There were an awful lot there, but I know there's quite a bit of advice on the IWFM website as well that you can follow up with, and we've got some of it on the screen now. The advice seems to be from the panel is that there's no one size fits all when it comes to the workplace, to returning to work. We need to ask people how they feel about the return to work, and that mental health is really important in this, and a lot of people will feel quite anxious about it, and we will play a big role as facilities managers in reassuring them. We've learnt during this period of home working that actually the tech works really well at home, and a lot of people are really happy at working at home. So there's going to be big expectations when people come back to the office. They've been productive at home. They might have missed that collaboration. They certainly missed the informal chats and that sort of thing. But there are higher expectations perhaps of the office now, and tech will play a massive role as we get back into the office in terms of managing social distancing, occupancy-based cleaning, employee reassurance definitely, and compliance and planning as we move from 10%, 20%, 30% occupancy back to 100% occupancy if that does happen next year. Clearly there's a lot of work to be done for facility services, companies from cleaning and security and catering. I know that there's a lot of planning going on ahead at the moment, and on the IWFM website there's some really good resources there that give some really practical step-by-step information. And the key thing we've found is that we can't really police, it's difficult to police social distancing. We are going to have to rely on people to do their own thing and nudge and educate rather than force people, because that simply won't work. And I think what somebody did ask, and perhaps it's a good question to end up on, will this be a time when we think, is the office the best place to work, or can we actually work in other spaces? So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you very much for our panel. Raj from Free Space, Alison from Leesman, Simone from Rico, and Ravi from Anabas. Thank you very much for your contribution, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Kathy.
Are we offline now?
Looks like we are.
I think so. Brilliant. Oh, well done.